The lone church bell tolled across Willow Creek as Penelope Zimmermann's heart sank with every hollow sound. The wedding march that should have accompanied her walk down the aisle would never come. The pianist had fallen ill, and in a frontier town of just over 300 souls in 1878 Colorado, there weren't many alternatives. She stood frozen at the back of the small whitewashed church, her cream-colored dress catching the late afternoon sun streaming through the windows. Her eyes scanned the faces of friends and neighbors who had turned to watch her entrance, their expressions a mixture of sympathy and anticipation. The town had been abuzz for weeks about the marriage between the schoolteacher and the mysterious rancher who'd arrived 6 months prior. Penelope clutched her small bouquet of wildflowers tighter, willing her feet to move despite the silence that seemed to grow heavier by the second. She'd planned everything meticulously, everything except for this. Preston Faulkner sat in the back pew, hat resting on his knee, having slipped in late after finishing his chores at the neighboring ranch. He hadn't planned on attending the wedding, but something had drawn him there. Perhaps it was curiosity about the schoolteacher everyone spoke so highly of, or maybe it was simply the promise of free food at the celebration afterward. Whatever the reason, he found himself witness to the bride's dilemma. Preston had never considered himself a musical man, but years of solitary cattle drives had taught him to fill the silence with whistling. Tunes picked up from saloons across the frontier, melodies learned from Mexican vaqueros, and songs his mother had hummed while baking bread all had become part of his repertoire. Without thinking, he removed his hat and stood. The soft, clear notes of a gentle melody floated through the church as his lips formed a perfect whistle. It wasn't the traditional wedding march, but rather a folk song about finding one's way home after a long journey. Heads turned toward the tall figure at the back of the church. Penelope's eyes met his, and a small, grateful smile touched her lips. She took a step forward, then another, moving in time with his improvised melody. But when she reached the altar, the groom was nowhere to be seen. The whispers began immediately. Wilson Cooper, son of the region's wealthiest cattle baron, had apparently reconsidered his promise to marry the town's schoolteacher. Preston's whistling trailed off awkwardly as Reverend Tanner cleared his throat, clearly unsure how to proceed. "I believe," the Reverend began delicately, "we should all take a moment to." The church door banged open. Everyone turned, expecting to see the wayward groom. Instead, young Timothy Harrison stood there, hat in hand, breathing heavily. "Miss Zimmermann," he gasped, "Mr. Cooper ain't coming. His father forbade the match this morning, and they've ridden to Denver." The collective gasp that filled the church was quickly followed by a heavy silence. Penelope stood perfectly still, her face draining of color as the whispers began anew around her. Poor dear. Always knew a Cooper wouldn't settle for a schoolteacher. What will she do now? Preston watched as Penelope's shoulders straightened almost imperceptibly. With remarkable composure, she turned to address the assembled townspeople. "I apologize for the inconvenience," she said, her voice wavering only slightly. "Please enjoy the refreshments that have been prepared at the town hall." With that, she walked back down the aisle, head held high despite the tears threatening to spill onto her cheeks. Something about her dignity in that moment struck Preston deeply. Before he could think better of it, he stepped into the aisle as she approached. "Miss Zimmermann," he said, doffing his hat. "I believe you deserve better than this. May I escort you outside?" Penelope looked up at this tall stranger whose whistling had momentarily saved her from complete humiliation. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes were kind. "Thank you, Mr. Faulkner. Preston Faulkner. I work at the Hayward Ranch." She accepted his offered arm, grateful for the support as her legs threatened to give way beneath her. Outside, away from the pitying glances, Penelope finally allowed herself a deep, shuddering breath. "That was very kind of you, Mr. Faulkner. The whistling and this. Call me Preston, please," and it was nothing, seemed the only decent thing to do. He shifted uncomfortably, unused to making conversation with ladies. "That was a beautiful tune," she said softly. "What's it called, The Road Home? My mother used to sing it." He paused. "I'm sorry about your wedding." A flash of pain crossed her face. "I should have known better. The Coopers were never going to accept someone like me. Someone like you, a simple schoolteacher with no family name or fortune." She looked down at her wedding dress, now seeming more like a costume than a symbol of new beginnings. "Well, if you ask me, Wilson Cooper's a damn fool, pardon my language, madam." This unexpected comment brought a small smile to her lips. "I should go change." "People will be talking enough as it is." Preston nodded, then hesitated. "Miss Zimmermann, I don't mean to be forward, but would you allow me to call on you sometime? Perhaps when the town gossip has died down a bit." Penelope looked at him with surprise. "You don't even know me, Mr. Faulkner." "No, madam, I don't. But I'd like to. Anyone who can walk down that aisle with such dignity after being jilted is someone worth knowing, I reckon." For the first time that day, Penelope felt a genuine smile form. "I would like that, Mr. Faulkner." 3 days later, Preston rode into town after finishing his work at the ranch. He had spent those days thinking about the schoolteacher with the quiet strength and wondering if his impulsive offer to call on her had been presumptuous. Still, he found himself tying his horse outside the small building that served as both Willow Creek's school and Penelope's residence. The afternoon lessons had just ended, and children streamed past him, some eyeing the tall cowboy curiously. Preston removed his hat and knocked on the doorframe. Penelope looked up from her desk where she had been grading papers. Her hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her simple blue dress was a stark contrast to the wedding gown he had last seen her in. "Mr. Faulkner," she said, surprise evident in her voice. "I wasn't sure you'd actually come." "I said I would." He stood awkwardly, hat in hand. "I thought perhaps I might walk you to dinner at the hotel restaurant if you haven't other plans." Penelope hesitated. The town was still buzzing with gossip about her failed wedding, and being seen with another man so soon would only fuel the rumors. Yet something about Preston's straightforward manner appealed to her. "That's very kind, but I'm not sure it's proper, given the circumstances." "I understand." "Perhaps another time then." He turned to leave. "Wait," she called. "I have some bread and stew I made. It's simple fare, but you're welcome to join me here if you'd like. Less conspicuous that way." Preston smiled. "I'd be honored, Miss Zimmermann." As they shared the modest meal at her small table, Preston told her about his life. Born in Missouri, he had headed west after the war, working cattle drives and eventually settling in Colorado. He spoke of the mountains and prairies with such vivid description that Penelope could almost see them through his eyes. "And what brought you to teaching?" he asked, genuinely curious. "My father was a professor before he died. Books were always important in our home." She paused, considering. "After my parents passed in the influenza outbreak of '68, I had few options. Teaching seemed the most respectable for a woman alone." "It's honest work," Preston said. "More important than pushing cows around, that's certain. And what about you? No wife waiting at home?" He shook his head. "Never found the right woman. Or maybe never stayed in one place long enough to look properly." Their conversation flowed easily into the evening, surprising them both with its comfort and candor. When Preston finally rose to leave, he found himself reluctant to go. "Thank you for the meal, Miss Zimmermann. Best I've had in some time." "Penelope, please, and thank you for the company. It's been a difficult week." "Penelope," he repeated, liking the way it sounded. "Might I call on you again?" She smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I'd like that very much." In the weeks that followed, Preston made a habit of visiting Penelope after school hours. Sometimes they would walk along the creek that gave the town its name, other times they would simply sit on her small porch talking as the sun set. He brought her wildflowers and books when he could find them, small tokens that meant more to her than Wilson Cooper's expensive gifts ever had. For Penelope, these visits became the bright spot in days otherwise filled with whispers and pitying glances. Preston treated her not as a woman who had been humiliated, but as someone worthy of respect and attention. He listened when she spoke of her dreams of someday opening a proper library in town, and he shared his own modest hope of saving enough to buy a small ranch of his own. One evening in late August, they sat watching fireflies dance over the creek. The summer heat was finally giving way to cooler evenings, and Penelope had wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. "I've been thinking," Preston said suddenly. "A dangerous pastime," she teased. He chuckled. "Perhaps. I've been offered a job helping drive a herd to Kansas City. Good money, but I'd be gone at least 2 months." Penelope felt an unexpected pang at the thought of him leaving. "When would you go?" "Next week, but I wanted to ask." He hesitated, then reached for her hand. "Would you write to me while I'm gone?" The touch of his calloused fingers against hers sent a flutter through her chest. "I would like that very much. And might I write to you as well, not just as a friend, Penelope, but as a man who's growing mighty fond of a certain schoolteacher." In the soft twilight, Penelope felt herself blush. "I think I would like that even more, Preston." Their letters became their courtship. Preston wrote of the trail, the cattle, the stars that seemed different somehow when viewed from the Kansas plains. Penelope wrote of her students, the changing seasons in Willow Creek, and the book of poetry he had given her before leaving. Neither explicitly spoke of love, yet it grew between them in the spaces between words, in the careful way they saved and reread each other's letters, in the anticipation that built as Preston's return drew near. When he finally rode back into Willow Creek in early November, the first snow was falling. He went directly to the schoolhouse, not even stopping to clean the trail dust from his clothes. Penelope was dismissing her students when she saw him through the window. Her heart leaped into her throat as she hurried the children along, barely maintaining her composure until the last one had left. Preston stood in the doorway, hat in hand, looking more weathered but somehow more substantial than when he'd left. "You're back," she said simply. "I am." There was a moment of awkward silence before they both spoke at once. "I missed. Did you?" They laughed, tension breaking. Preston stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "I missed you something fierce, Penelope Zimmermann, and I you, Preston Faulkner." His hands, gentle despite their strength, cupped her face. "May I?" She nodded, and his lips met hers in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long journey. When they parted, Preston didn't step away. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. "I saved every penny from that drive," he said, "and I bought something in Kansas City." He opened his palm to reveal a simple gold band. "It's not fancy, but it's honest, like what I feel for you." Penelope's eyes widened. "Preston, I know it's sudden and folks might talk about you marrying so soon after." "Well, but I love you, Penelope. I think I started falling the moment you walked down that aisle with nothing but my poor whistling to guide you." Tears welled in her eyes. "People will talk. Let them. I don't care what anyone thinks except you." She took a deep breath. "Then yes. Yes, I will marry you, Preston Faulkner." The news of their engagement spread through Willow Creek like wildfire. Some townspeople approved, glad to see the schoolteacher find happiness after her public humiliation. Others whispered that it was too soon, that she must be desperate to accept a proposal from a common ranch hand. Penelope and Preston paid little mind to the gossip. They set a date for the following spring, giving themselves time to prepare and the town time to adjust to the idea. Preston continued working at the Hayward Ranch, saving every penny while Penelope taught her students and prepared for their future together. Winter settled over Colorado, harsh and beautiful. On Christmas Eve, a blizzard swept through the region, leaving Willow Creek blanketed in deep snow. Preston had promised to join Penelope for a small celebration, but as evening fell and the storm intensified, she began to worry. Just as she was considering the foolishness of venturing out to look for him, a knock came at her door. She flung it open to find Preston, covered in snow but grinning broadly. "You shouldn't have come in this weather," she scolded, pulling him inside and helping him remove his frozen coat. "And miss Christmas with my future wife? Not a chance." He stamped the snow from his boots. "Besides, I've brought news too good to wait." Once he had warmed himself by the fire, Preston took her hands in his. "Mr. Hayward is retiring come spring. He's offered to sell me a portion of his land, 80 acres with a small cabin. It needs work, but it could be ours, Penelope. Our home." Tears sprang to her eyes. "Oh, Preston, that's wonderful. It means I'll have to work harder than ever these next few months, and it won't be easy starting our own place," but she silenced him with a kiss. "It will be perfect because it will be ours." As winter gave way to spring, the cabin and land became their shared project. Penelope would ride out after school to help Preston with repairs and planning. Together they planted a small vegetable garden, repaired the roof, and made the modest cabin into a home filled with books, handmade quilts, and hopes for the future. 2 weeks before their wedding day, disaster struck. A fire broke out at the school during the night, destroying much of the building and Penelope's adjoining quarters. Though no one was hurt, many of the town's books and school supplies were lost, along with most of Penelope's personal belongings. The town rallied, offering temporary housing and donations to rebuild. Preston immediately suggested moving up their wedding date. "You need a home and we have one ready," he said simply. Why wait? The practical solution made sense, but Penelope hesitated. "Everything feels so rushed now. The school needs rebuilding, my students need me, and I've lost my mother's locket I was planning to wear." Preston took her hands. "We can wait if you want, but remember what you told me about your first wedding, how everything was planned perfectly, yet nothing went as expected." She nodded, the memory still painful despite the happiness she had found since. "Maybe this time," he suggested gently, "we don't worry so much about perfect. Maybe we just focus on what matters, you and me, starting our life together." His words settled over her like a comforting blanket. "You're right, let's do it. This Sunday." With only 3 days to prepare, the wedding was hastily arranged. The town, touched by the couple's story, came together to help. The women organized a simple reception while the men made sure the cabin was ready for the new bride. Sunday dawned clear and mild, a perfect spring day. The ceremony would be held outdoors beside the creek, with Reverend Tanner officiating. Simple decorations of wildflowers and ribbons adorned the area, and benches had been brought out for the guests. Penelope wore a dress borrowed from the mayor's wife, blue instead of white, but lovely nonetheless. As she prepared in a room at the hotel, doubt began to creep in. This wedding was nothing like she had imagined. No formal dress, no carefully planned details, and once again, no musician to play as she walked toward her future. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Sullivan, the midwife who had helped with the wedding preparations, peeked in. "It's time, dear. Everyone's waiting." Penelope took a deep breath and nodded. She would not falter now, not when happiness was so close at hand. At the creek, Preston waited nervously. He had polished his boots until they shone and wore his one good suit, purchased specifically for this occasion. His hands fidgeted with his hat as he scanned the path where Penelope would appear. The assembled townspeople murmured among themselves, and Preston caught snippets of conversation, some supportive, others less so, rushing into another marriage. At least this one showed up. They seemed genuinely happy together. Reverend Tanner cleared his throat. "I believe we're ready to begin." Preston looked down the path once more, and there she was. Penelope stood alone, no father or family member to escort her. Their eyes met across the distance, and everything else faded away: the gossiping townspeople, the makeshift decorations, the uncertainty that had plagued them both. But as she took her first step, the silence became oppressive. Once again, Penelope found herself walking toward marriage with no music to mark the occasion. Preston saw the moment of hesitation in her step, recognized the echo of her previous heartbreak in the stillness. Without thinking, he raised his fingers to his lips and began to whistle. The clear, sweet notes of the road home floated through the air, the same melody that had carried her down the aisle months ago when her heart was breaking. Now, it surrounded her like an embrace as she walked toward the man who had taught her to trust again. Tears welled in Penelope's eyes as she moved in time with his whistling. This simple tune, offered freely from the heart, meant more to her than any formal wedding march ever could. When she reached him, Preston's whistling faded to a smile. "Hello, beautiful," he whispered. "You remembered," she murmured back. "I'll never forget the first time I saw you walk to that tune." Reverend Tanner began the ceremony, but Preston and Penelope hardly heard the familiar words. They were lost in each other, in the journey that had brought them to this moment and the promise of the path ahead. When it came time for their vows, Preston surprised everyone by whistling a soft melody before speaking. "This is my promise to you," he explained. "When words fail, when times get hard, when joy overflows, I'll always have a tune for you, Penelope. A reminder of how we began and the life we'll build together." Penelope's voice trembled as she responded, "And I promise to always listen for your song, to walk beside you through whatever comes, and to create a harmony of our own making." As Reverend Tanner pronounced them husband and wife, Preston pulled Penelope close and sealed their union with a kiss that held all the music of their hearts. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful. Tables had been set up near the creek, laden with food contributed by various townspeople. A makeshift dance floor had been created on the flattened grass, and several men with instruments provided lively tunes. As evening fell, lanterns were lit, casting a warm glow over the gathering. Preston led Penelope onto the dance floor for their first dance as husband and wife. The musicians began to play, but Preston shook his head. "With your permission," he called to them, and the musicians lowered their instruments. Taking Penelope in his arms, Preston began to whistle their song once more, soft and tender, as they moved together in perfect rhythm. The townspeople watched in silence, moved by the intimate moment between the couple who had found each other against all odds. When the dance ended, Penelope reached up to touch Preston's cheek. "I never imagined I could be this happy." He caught her hand and kissed her palm. "This is just the beginning, Mrs. Faulkner." As the party continued around them, Preston led Penelope away from the crowd, toward the creek where they had spent so many evenings talking and dreaming. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "I couldn't give you a grand wedding or fancy trimmings, but I wanted you to have this." He opened his hand to reveal a delicate silver locket. It wasn't her mother's, but it was beautiful in its own right. "Preston, it's lovely. Open it." Inside, he had somehow managed to place a tiny scrap of paper with musical notes scratched onto it. "Our song," he explained. "Written down so you can always carry it with you." Penelope threw her arms around his neck, overcome with emotion. "It's perfect. Everything is perfect." As the spring months gave way to summer, Penelope and Preston settled into their life together. The school was rebuilt, and Penelope continued teaching while helping Preston establish their small ranch. They worked hard, faced challenges, and celebrated small victories together. By the following spring, their family had grown with the arrival of their daughter, Emma. Preston would whistle their special tune to soothe the baby to sleep, a tradition that became part of their family story. Years passed, and Willow Creek grew along with the Faulkner family. Penelope eventually realized her dream of establishing a proper library, while Preston's careful stewardship allowed them to expand their ranch. They added a son, William, and later adopted a young boy, Joseph, who had lost his parents in an outbreak of fever. On their 10th anniversary, Preston surprised Penelope by organizing a party at their now expanded home. Friends and neighbors gathered to celebrate the couple whose unusual courtship had become something of a local legend. As twilight fell, Preston led his wife to the porch and presented her with a small wooden box. Inside was a brass music box, specially made during his last trip to Denver. "Turn the key," he urged. As she did, the familiar notes of the road home played clearly in the evening air. Penelope's eyes filled with tears. "After all these years, you still find ways to surprise me. And I always will," he promised, taking her in his arms for a dance on their porch as their children watched from the doorway. Later that night, as they sat together watching the stars, Preston whistled softly, the tune as clear and true as it had been that first day in the church. "You know," Penelope said thoughtfully, "I used to think that day in the church was the worst of my life. Now I see it was actually the first day of everything good." Preston squeezed her hand. "That's the thing about roads home. Sometimes the path takes unexpected turns. And sometimes," she added, leaning her head against his shoulder, "the music finds you when you need it most." In the years that followed, whenever someone in Willow Creek told the story of the schoolteacher and the whistling cowboy, they would speak of how love appears in the most unexpected moments, sometimes in the form of a simple tune that carries you home to where you belong.